Thank you everyone for joining today for the last day of our Graduate Careers Exploration Week. Today we have an exciting panel to talk all about careers in the consumer packaged goods industry. So we have three amazing panelists joining us today, and we'll get to know more about what they do, more about their organizations, and also hear a little bit about their career trajectories as they tread along this journey. So just some housekeeping things. This session, as I mentioned, is being recorded. So the recording will be available next week on the SCS Careers YouTube channel and our Media Space channel. And then also, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask your questions, or if you want to put your questions in the chat, you can also do that. Or if you're uncomfortable asking them directly, you can also send them to me through private message, and I'm happy to ask those for you. My role today is just to facilitate our conversation here, so I will try not to talk too much, and I'll turn it all over to our students who are here. This event is for you all to get to know our panelists, ask any questions you have about this industry. So start thinking about those questions that you want to ask. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We're going to start first off with introductions. So panelists, if you can tell our students and postdocs who are here a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the field that you were in when you were here at Illinois, and your current role and organizations that you're working at. So Lisa, since you're first on my list, I'm going to get started with you.
Sure. So my name is Lisa Flugge-Berendes. I graduated from University of Illinois in the year 2000, so I'm a little bit of a senior panelist, I guess. I got my Ph.D. in organic chemistry. I've been in the CPG industry since. I currently work at SC Johnson as a principal chemist in the disinfecting products category.
So thanks, Lisa. Chris?
Yeah, can you hear me? I switched to my headphones, so make sure someone can hear me all right.
We can hear you, but your audio is kind of choppy.
Oh, sorry, it could be our Wi-Fi here too. Let me just make sure.
Nope, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, a lot better.
Sorry about that. Having some technical issues today. Haven't used Zoom in a while. Yeah, I'm Chris Pattillo. I got my PhD from Illinois in 2019. And I started at 3M around that same time. I'm in our called Specialty Materials Development Lab, but I do pressure sensitive adhesive formulation development. I do specifically emulsion polarization, like water-based adhesives. So a lot of different products that we work on there. But sort of sticking with chemistry and making glue, basically.
Great, thank you. And then Becca.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Becca Weiner. I graduated from U of I with my bachelor's in 2011, and then I did a PhD in materials chemistry at Indiana. And then I did a postdoc at the FDA, and then I've been at Mars the remainder of my career. So I've been in different parts of the business. So I've worked in corporate, Mars Wrigley, so on the candy side, and I just started actually in January in Mars Petcare. And I focus on food safety in our packaging and anything that like touches the food to make sure that it's safe. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all for those introductions. Students, I just wanted to remind you all that this is a networking session. So if possible at all, if you're able to maybe turn on your cameras, I'm sure our alumni would love to see your faces as you interact with them. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you all for any questions that you have.
Hello, my name's Riley Carter. I'm in the Mitchell Lab. I just wanted to ask, I mean, it's a pretty generic question, but what does your like week or your day typically look like? Like what kind of things are coming to your attention that you have duties with?
Oh,
Whoever
I can,
wants to go.
I'll jump in first. It depends on the week. And I will say, being in disinfecting technologies and going through the pandemic, my weeks were a little different then than now. But there's meetings. Any corporate environment, you're going to have far more meetings than you think are necessary. But some of them are. We can squeeze in some lab work from time to time. A lot of it is meeting with, when you're working on a product, you want to meet with your marketing partners. What do you want the product to do? You want to meet with claims and legal. What can we say about the product and how do we substantiate these claims? And some of it is meeting with product safety, like what can we sell, what based on the region we want to launch in, and then talking with the regions. Talking to, say, South America, what type of product do you need? What can we make? What raw materials are available there?
I can jump into. So it certainly depends on kind of like what your job role is. I can say personally, like I still am fortunately able to spend most of my time in the lab. I do a lot of experiments, sort of process optimization, process development for our products. My group does both that process work and also more kind of like formulation and R&D work. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of talking to customers and kind of testing materials as well. So some of that can get a little bit, tedious sometimes. As a chemist, it's nice to stay in the lab. I'm fortunate to also get to be in the factory a fair amount. I'm actually here at one of our factories right now, doing some pilot experiments. So we get to travel to the factories as well and kind of like facilitate that scale up and that process work too. So a little bit of everything.
So I am obviously a chemist, but I actually don't work in a lab at all. I haven't for a couple of years now, and that was a decision that I made like when I changed roles. Like Lisa said, I'm on the phone a lot. There are a lot of meetings. Mars is a global company, so like my manager sits in France. I have colleagues in different parts of the US. I have different parts of Europe. Talk to people in Australia. So my typical day is not like a typical like sign in at X time and sign out at a certain time. Like I will have meetings in the evening. I have a toddler, so like I'll try to take my evening meetings like after he's in bed. But I'll oftentimes be on the phone starting at like 7 a.m. The nice thing about that is that I can go for a run at 2:30 because that's kind of like a quieter time in the day. So a lot of meetings. So I'm in food safety, so I'm in packaging specifically. So I'll oftentimes work with like our packaging engineers. I was previously in regulatory, so now I work with the regulatory team, and also like legal. I'll talk to like our supplier quality team who interfaces with our suppliers directly, to talk to them like if we do have a food safety issue, like a risk, or if we, want to get more clarity on like what their processes are to mitigate safety. So it's a lot of time on the phone and emails and then PowerPoint, Excel. So yeah.
Hey, thank you all for sharing that. Any other questions? David, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, got a quick question. Specifically in your chemist roles, I was curious on how much your work as a chemist impacted the final products that you made and how much freedom you had in, if you thought a product should go a certain direction, what was the balance between the scientific merits versus the business case that you have to make, and how did that play out in your work?
I can go first. It depends. I've had both situations happen. I've had a product that from a chemical standpoint absolutely was amazing. Manufacturing didn't want to take the hit to figure out how to make it. It was going to take a bit of a ramp up to get there, and they just didn't want to do it. So we didn't go forward. I have also had a project where the goal was one thing, and I found out a completely different path worked better. And after much discussion, we went the other way, the way that the science said to go. So I think it just depends on the project and what the ultimate goals are. I mean, ultimately, we all work for for-profit companies. We all, whatever's going to make us the most money, right? That's one of the downsides, I think, in grad school. You like to dive down the rabbit hole and figure out why is this going wrong. We don't have time for that. There's a lot of this works. Let's go.
Yeah, certainly from my experience in a company as large as 3M, there's definitely is a strong business push, right? I mean, there needs to be a profit, and there needs to be, a certain margin made on various products and stuff like that. So, certainly at 3M, there is a lot of flexibility as a chemist to kind of work on whatever you want to work on, which is actually really nice. And a lot of products come from that. We call it our like 15% time culture, where basically like you have the freedom to carve out a certain amount of your time for just exploratory stuff and scouting. And, that can depend a little bit on what business group you're in terms of the level that they prioritize that. But, certainly, in my group, we do a lot of R&D and I can essentially work on whatever I want, which is kind of nice. And that's how a lot of products will get through. One of my older coworkers who just retired used to say, you still have to do your day job, but there is a certain amount of flexibility, and the product that I'm running right now in the factory was basically that. It came out of kind of just messing around in the lab when I was a newer employee, and here it is today, scaling up. So, but you can have the best product in the world, and if it doesn't get the margin that the business group is looking for, it's not going to go anywhere. So it doesn't mean it's a waste of time, because it could show up, maybe it'll be useful for something else down the road. That's another good thing about being a large company, is that you never know when something will be useful for something else. So just because it gets canceled one day doesn't mean it's not going to pop up 5 years later for a totally different application. So I think it's really important, especially when you're new at a company, to like, don't try your best to not say no to anything as best as you can. And you kind of get yourself into a lot of different programs and a lot of different experiences, and you'll find that opportunities kind of just pop up if you really kind of let yourself explore stuff as best as you can. So long answer to your question. Sorry.
So I've never worked in product development per se, but my first role at Mars, I was in method development. So developing the quality methods that like our factory engineers were doing on the line. So for example, like measuring viscosity of chocolate, like which really impacts the mouth feel and how it's going to wrap a bar, like imagine like a Snickers bar, or like flow into like a mold for like a Dove Promise. And coming from academia, it's like everything you want it to be optimized. Like you want the lowest method uncertainty. You want like the best methods, but in quality, not in safety. Because in safety, obviously, we're not very risk averse. I mean, we are very risk averse in safety. In quality, it's like it can be good enough. It's like, what is like the fastest way, and what is a good enough way to measure viscosity that's going to give us the outcome we need? It doesn't have to be perfect. So that was sort of, I don't even know if that answers your question, but for me, that was sort of a big difference, I guess, in the chemistry side, I guess, in terms of moving from that like more research to more, CPG side.
One of the more shocking things to me was I was used to, being very precise and measuring everything out to the fullest extent. And I started working like, plus or minus 10% in the factory, just slop it in there. Like, okay, this is a new world.
Yeah. It was very surprising for me too.
Yeah.
Quick follow on to something, Chris, you said, don't say no to something when you get there early on. That goes against what I would imagine, that you don't want to get pulled in too many directions at once. But I saw heads nod. So can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that and how that plays out?
Yeah, I think like set boundaries that certainly don't spread yourself too thin. But I think especially when you're starting and especially at a larger company where it can be harder to kind of like find people in different divisions, find those collaborations and stuff, if someone approaches you and says like, hey, I have this idea, as best as you can, try to work on it with them, or at least point them in the direction of someone who maybe who might be better suited for it, but you can kind of still be in the loop, and maybe there will be something to be involved with. So I found that to be really valuable when I started. Like, someone literally just walked in my office and was like, hey, like, I have this weird idea, like, can we do this? And I was like, yeah, like, we can try it. And we played around with it for like a year, and it didn't end up going anywhere, but I made some connections. Like, now I know some people in that division. So, you have to obviously set limits for yourself and like have a work-life balance. Please, please, please have a work-life balance, because that is super important and maybe not emphasized enough in graduate school. Is you need to have some work-life balance. So set yourself limits, but also like build those connections and try your best to kind of like find programs that you can get involved in, because it will pay dividends later on, like having those connections and having that network built.
Yeah, Mars is like a really network-based company. So I don't know, 2 years like my PhD and undergrad work, I worked with Kathy Murphy for my undergrad, and then a PhD with Sarah Skrablak, who also went to Illinois, on nanoparticles. So like I've got a nano background. Nanomaterials are not super like industrially relevant. In fact, in food, we don't want nanomaterials. They're regulated against, and also consumers do not want to hear about nanoparticles in their food. And like a team, like in a different division of the company, but I happened to sit with them, and they knew. They were like, hey, like, we have this sample of ink. Could you like go to Northwestern? I'm based in Chicago, and like do microscopy on it for us. And I like asked my boss, and she was like, yeah, sure. And then it's just like, it's like, you can kind of do like little favors, and like I hadn't done microscopy in a while, so it was like kind of nice to like get on the microscope again. So it's like just like having that network and like saying yes. And like then it was kind of interesting, because like that ink, then in my next role I worked at inks, and I was like, oh yeah, I did this microscopy in my previous role. So it's just like Chris said, like you have to set boundaries. But it does provide good learning and like good networking opportunities within the company, especially in a big company where there's just a lot of teams. Like I said, like I've been in 3 different parts of the business. I've never left Chicago. So I don't know, Lisa, if you had anything to add.
No, basically everything that the other 2 panelists said, and don't turn down, like, one of the most valuable projects I had was when I first started at SC Johnson. I was asked to go through a whole list of our formulas and classify them, which sounds incredibly boring, but I got really good at knowing what we sold where. And now people come ask me, hey, where do we sell this? Oh, that's in Brazil and New Zealand. Hugely valuable now. So don't turn down even things that look boring.
Awesome. Thank you for those insights. So there are some questions in the chat. Before we move on to the one that we have, there was another question that was sent to me. From your perspective, how's your job search like, especially the job market requirement probably won't be the same as your PhD thesis. So how would you leverage that background during the job search process?
Good question. Some of it is, so this is what I tell, I have mentored several interns that have always wondered, do I just go get a job out of undergrad or go to grad school? I generally tell them all to go to grad school, because what you learn, I don't do anything related to what I did for my PhD. I did a whole bunch of NMR spectroscopy on carbohydrates. Don't do any of that anymore. But I did learn how to fail, because most of what I do doesn't work. And you need to be able to dust yourself off and try a different path. And coming out of undergrad, you don't have that. All your lab experiments are set up to work, and if they don't, you don't get a good grade. And I have seen this over and over with people with bachelors and interns. They just completely, not always completely lose it, but it's a wall they hit. Or if this didn't work, what do I do? I'm terrible at this. No, most things don't work. So try to leverage, you're probably not going to find a job that fits exactly with your PhD, but you learned how to learn and how to research, and that's what you sell.
Yeah, similar to, you know, I mean, I remember when I interviewed at 3M, I probably got very few questions about my actual research that I presented. I mean, people were interested, they asked questions, but a lot of the questions I got were, I mean, and the people I interviewed with, who I ended up working with, you know, pretty much just said, like, we kind of just want to know how you are as a person. Like, how do you work as a team? How do you collaborate? You know, kind of like Lisa was saying, you know, your job is probably not gonna be doing what you did in grad school. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Like, that's like, but you've really, you know, in your interview, it's good to emphasize your skills as a collaborator. You know, how will you approach scientific problems? How you think on your feet? Kind of how versatile you are, because that's the skills that are really gonna um, go far in your career. And obviously, like, you know, your scientific and chemistry knowledge, but like how you work as a scientist is really important, I think, to a lot of corporate jobs.
I'll just echo what Chris and Lisa said. It's like, it's the soft skills, it's communicating, networking, problem solving is huge. I mean, as a PhD, also, you stand up and speak for an hour at a time. I've never spoken that long in industry again, which honestly is fine with me. But it does teach you like how to present, how to like interact with an audience. It is pretty different now because we are mostly presenting on the computer. Even if we're in person, there's usually someone virtual. So you know, you're usually still on a screen, which some of you probably do in your PhD. I did not. But yeah, it's like those soft skills. It's not the science. The time I mentioned that I did microscopy was literally one time. I don't even think I could turn on a TEM now. Like, I don't know, none of that. It doesn't matter, but the problem solving of like synthetic chemistry that I used, you know, 10 years ago is still used as a problem solving skill now.
I think another thing too to keep in mind, I don't know if the other panelists feel this way, but you know, certainly I think in grad school there's a lot of like pressure on grad students to kind of feel like, you know, you have to know everything. Right? It's like you got to know all the things that you're doing in your PhD. You got to know everything. You know, you go into prelim, you got to know everything. I mean, my experience at least, you know, that you don't need to know everything in the real world, right? Like, you kind of become an expert in specific things, and you have that network of people that you can rely on, and you can say, I don't know that. Let's go ask this engineer, because they're going to know that question, and I'm not going to just make something up, right? So, you know, there's a little bit of like having to take that pressure off yourself to like be the expert in literally everything at your company, and that's just not realistic. Like, and you shouldn't have to, right? Like, that's why you have a network of people in your coworkers that you can go to and ask those questions. So I think that's like something I realized, at least, was like, oh, I don't have to know like literally everything. It's okay to say I don't know, like, but let's go figure it out. So anyways.
Wow, that's very reassuring, I'm sure, for our attendees here today. So next question, again in the chat, was to what degree are you able to affect environmental change through your company's product lines? As you know, there's a need for single-use plastic packaging for food and healthcare applications, but it stands in the looming shadow of ever-present plastic pollution. So I'm curious if you're able to influence that outcome with your expertise and experience, and how much is the pursuit or maintenance of product lines driven by expected economic outcomes?
Okay, well, I will jump in because one of the things I'm very proud I work for SC Johnson is we recognized the plastic crisis several years ago. In fact, if you go to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, we sponsor a whole exhibit on ocean plastic and the problem. And it's tricky because plastic is cheap and it's easy to sell our product in it. But we have a whole sustainability group working on how can we reduce the impact of plastic and how can we make better choices on ingredients that go into our products. We have a list of materials we are not allowed to use that a bunch of our competitors actually are allowed to use. So sometimes we have to go explain, yes, this is going to be more expensive because yes, competitor A uses that material. We're not allowed. It's on our list of don't use. Though we have to work around that. And then looking at down to where we use a lot of surfactants. Where does the hydrophobe from the surfactant come from? If it comes from palm, does it come from a plantation that's contributing to deforestation? We can't use that. So there are ways to make better choices when we develop the products. So because we're a private company, we don't necessarily have to like meet quarterly goals. So I think we have a little more leeway to make better choices versus what's the cheapest.
So in my previous role and in my current role, I work in packaging, food packaging. If you think about when you're like walking around, you're going to see wrappers on the ground. You see a ton of trash. We as Mars, I mean, are not proud of that, right? Like that our products are, wrappers are being used. You see gum on the ground, gum, right? We own Wrigley, that you see gum on the ground. So I work in packaging. So a lot of the projects I've worked on are sustainable packaging. So I was able to support getting a compostable bag for M&Ms onto the market. We have paper-based recyclable packaging in Australia and the UK for Snickers and Mars bars. And now in Petcare, we are working on films that are recyclable. So those, I think some of them are out, some of them aren't. There's also like, with food especially, it's like paper doesn't have a great barrier. So imagine if you put a chocolate bar, it's not going to stay on the shelf as long. So it's like, okay, if we're going to use paper packaging, like how do we adjust the shelf life? So there's a lot of like long-term kind of consequences of changing packaging. It's not just like, oh, this is more expensive. It's like, this is more expensive and it's going to be on the shelf shorter. So how do we, get around that? So we've been working on that a lot. And like, even on my desk, I have like a bunch of examples, even of like competitors. So this is a paper pack. I have another like paper. These are Smarties. They're made by Nestle. But yes, I'm really proud to be able to work on all this more sustainable, recyclable, compostable packaging materials.
Yeah, at 3M certainly we similarly there's a lot of emphasis on sustainable packaging for products. Can we make tapes and post-its, stuff that are repulpable or recyclable and stuff like that. From the chemistry side, we've got materials that we try to incorporate, bio-based monomers and stuff like that. So there's certainly, it depends on the need and on the market. Sometimes those aren't always feasible, it just depends. But there has definitely been a lot of emphasis on that. And I specifically work in is water-based adhesives, so they're made in water, which is great because no solvent, none of that stuff. So there's definitely a lot of growing interest in that technology as well for a lot of different types of products. And so I think at 3M we're really trying to push, eliminating solvent usage, moving towards water-based materials, recyclable packaging, all that kind of stuff, paper-based tapes. So it's definitely a big area at 3M too.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question. Any other questions from the audience before we move on to other questions in the chat? Okay, so I'll go ahead and ask. So Riley asks, many job listings say that they want several years of experience in an area, like current good manufacturing practices, that type of thing, that select against new graduates. What type of roles at your company would you hire a newly graduated PhD for? And what advice do you have for landing your first industrial job?
So at SC Johnson, most of our new PhD hires actually came through our intern program. We do have a summer intern program that we bring in a couple of PhDs a year. That is, then they work for like 3 months with the option we might offer them a full-time position if there's one available at the end, or when one opens up. Otherwise, they usually My first job out of grad school was actually at Kimberly-Clark. And it was because I just kept putting my resume in at the career services office, and the right person pulled it. I had done a ton of work with carbohydrates. They needed someone for their paper division, and I interviewed and got the job. So some of it is just luck, and some of it is just keep throwing your resume out there. Typically, new hires at both places come in a couple steps above someone with a bachelor's, but in the same types of groups. So you'll be doing product development, but you're expected to do more. Of Chris, Rebecca.
Certainly at 3M, you know, an entry level PhD level job, it's going to depend a lot on the group that you're in. You know, if you're doing more like hardcore R&D or more like product engineering, like product development type stuff, but you're going to be kind of like getting involved on programs and kind of working towards leading your own programs and stuff like that. But you know, you can kind of set your own direction. I think my biggest advice, and I was just telling this to somebody who was asking me about some jobs at 3M a few weeks ago, is to, I control saying this, don't put a lot of stock in what you see on a job listing. Honestly, they're usually written pretty vaguely. And I would just apply like really broadly. Like even if something on a job listing says X number of years of experience required, or, you know, X skills required, like it does not mean that you would not be a good fit for that and that you would not get an interview for that. So my advice is to just apply broadly. Like Lisa was saying, like, you know, get your resume out there. Don't think that just because something maybe is like 100% a perfect fit on paper means it's actually necessarily what the hiring manager is looking for, or would not also entertain, you know, your resume. So take it with a grain of salt, I think, is the best advice I would give. And just like apply broadly. And even if something doesn't sound interesting, like on paper, I don't think I ever would have applied for my job at 3M because it probably wasn't something I ever thought I would really want to do, and I love it. So like, you know, your interest might change too. So
yeah.
So I would say from like my biggest advice for applying is like use your network. And I remember as a graduate student sitting in something and someone telling me like, look around, like who's in the room with you right now. Like there's probably some postdoc, like I don't know what level, what year, but like you're a second year and there's like fifth year PhD students. Like these are your network. These are the people that you're like, reach out to them and say like, hey, you started in this job 3 years ago. I'm interested in working at your company, because they're also going to be able to get more insight into like what the hiring manager actually wants. Like what Chris was saying, it is like kind, you know, it's written by sometimes through HR. And then sometimes you're able to get that internal referral, and it just does make it a lot easier to get a job.
Yep.
I started at Mars as like a senior scientist. And a lot of PhDs start at the scientist level. I did a postdoc. I don't think an academic postdoc would have really helped. I did a postdoc at the FDA, and to be totally honest with you all, like just some background is that my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, lived in Chicago. I only wanted a job in Chicago. I was not going anywhere that wasn't Chicago. I applied very broadly. Sorry. And I like this postdoc at the FDA was like the best opportunity. It turned out to be a great opportunity. I loved it. I learned a lot, but I was not looking for a postdoc. And the FDA postdoc did pay like way better than like an academic postdoc. Not saying an academic postdoc isn't going to help you. I'm just saying like having the FDA on my resume helped with Mars, but that gave me the like couple of years of experience that they're looking for. So that is an option as well. But I would say like use your network, like apply to 100 jobs through LinkedIn. You might get interviews, you might get hits, but you're better off applying to 20 jobs through your LinkedIn connections and like reaching out and like if you want to reach out to me, like I'm happy to talk to you. Please tell me how we met because I'm not going to remember, but say, hey, I heard you at this Illinois career fair, or like real estate to recording. It's fine. Reach out. I'm interested in this job at Mars. Like, could you talk about it or find someone? And like most people at companies are like, especially, we're happy to help and say like, hey, yeah, like, if we can. Sometimes I have people reach out to me about like marketing roles. And I'm like, I don't know anyone. I don't know anything about that job. I'm sorry. But if it's an R&D, I could probably find you someone. So yeah, use your network. Really, really use your network.
Right. Thank you for emphasizing the importance of networking, which I'm glad you all are here today. That's kind of the first step, and definitely utilizing LinkedIn. And when you do send out connection requests, adding those notes and not just sending out blank connection requests to strangers you haven't met. So kind of also following up on that networking aspect, another question in the chat was how or where did you find your mentors in your current company or when you were in graduate school? The person who asked the question said that the relationship maintaining for them is a little bit more challenging. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's something I've experienced from my experience. Finding informal mentors has been far more valuable. When I started at Kimberly-Clark, they had a mentorship program, which sounded great on paper. I was assigned a mentor who had 8 other people. She was a VP, which on paper sounded great, but she just did not have time and hadn't been in research for so long that it really, I met with her a few times and I was not getting anything out of it. What I have found valuable is view it as I need someone to help me with this or coach me through this discrete problem. Who can I go talk to? And you can have them as a mentor for the time you need. If you develop a friendship out of it, that's great. Otherwise, you can just view it as you don't need to maintain that relationship necessarily, or you can have it in your back pocket for the next time you need something. So I have had early in my career trying to figure out how to talk to our business side, the marketers. They speak a different language. I came out of grad school and everything was, here's the science, here's the data. No, you can't do that. You can't. The business side, you have to like, you can try to do that. Here are the risks. You can't tell them no. I needed someone to help me figure out how to do that nicely. So Chris, Becky.
Mentorship type things I found have, like Lisa was kind of saying, they kind of happen organically. Like they're people that you meet who you kind of just come to rely on and who you kind of know that you can go ask questions to. And similarly, 3M has kind of like a mentoring program. I've never really honestly participated because I didn't feel like I needed to just be assigned some kind of random person to, I found people kind of in my network and in my circle who I both am friends with, but also I feel like kind of mentor me. So seek out those people that you find at work that, you have a good relationship with. And I think that kind of becomes a mentor relationship in a lot of ways.
I agree. Like the formal mentoring programs, sometimes they work, like, obviously, but I've had better luck with just like finding who I work with that I connect with that's like maybe one level senior or maybe the same even level, but like has more experience in a different. I have a colleague who has like really strong experience in like horizon scanning, which is kind of like looking into the future and like determining what's going to happen. I'm such a scientist, like for me, that is very difficult. It's like I see what's in front of me, cut and dry. So we're the same job level, we have the same title, but like she was my mentor on like horizon scanning and like future thinking. So it's like, and we get along great, we're friends. So it's like they don't necessarily need to be like 10 levels senior to you. It just needs to be someone that you can learn from. And then hopefully it's mutually beneficial. Like they can also learn from you as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that advice. Another really good question that I thought in the chat was, what does career development or progress look like in each of your organizations, and how do roles and responsibilities change as you advance professionally? And then, is there still room for scientific exploration as you progress in your career?
So most companies, we have like pretty defined, here is like career path for a chemists come in different flavors at SC Johnson. I'm in the formulation role. We also have the strict scientist role. So we have here's the type of things you need to know and do before you go to the next level. And there also has to be an opening at that level. Roles and responsibilities, the further up you go, the more meetings, quite honestly, as everyone wants your advice or you to have input in various things. So I have found that I have less and less lab time. Try to keep Friday afternoons free to go do things in the lab. We do have freedom of explore time as well, similar to 3M. Up to 10% of our time can be just go do whatever. And then there's also the scientific exploration as part of product development, like figuring out, here's a technology we want to use. How do you use it? Go figure it out, the best way to implement it, what works with it, what doesn't. There is a lot of science that goes into that. Or say you want to clean the baked on grease from your stovetop. There's a lot of science that goes into what is it, how do you get rid of it, what's the most efficient way. It's something like we're used to in grad school, all these very elevated academic questions, and there's a lot of science that goes into everyday things like getting rid of the soap scum in your shower. So, Chris, Rebecca?
Yeah, 3M is pretty, I don't know how it is at other companies, but 3M is like, it's pretty clear that you're either staying on the scientist, like day-to-day kind of like lab science, R&D, or management. And if you're going to go to management, you're a manager. And that's kind of like your track now. And you can kind of stay more on like the product development and kind of like R&D side. There's kind of like we call it the T scale, but it's basically just like the technical kind of like ladder. Honestly, if you kind of are staying in the R&D sort of track and like product development stuff like that, your responsibilities don't necessarily change as you get higher and higher promoted. You just kind of take on more stuff and you become a little bit more of like a technical leader, a technical expert. But you're still fundamentally like doing R&D for new products, depending on what division you're in. And certainly at big companies, I'm sure like Mars and SC Johnson, there's, you can move around in different divisions and, people do that a lot. And you could move into quality or regulatory if you wanted to, but I would say at least at 3M there's kind of those tracks where like if you wanted to go into management and stuff like that, you can, or you can kind of stay on like more of the R&D like product development pathway. So you kind of take on more as you go, but your fundamental job doesn't really change, I guess, if that makes sense. But
So Mars also has like the T track, the technical, and the P track, like people leader track. And there's like it's kind of like a Y, I guess, but most everyone in here would come in as a T probably. And there is like the lower you are, I think the easier it is to kind of move back and forth. As you get more technical and more senior, I think it's harder to like swap because as you get higher and like the more technical side, you become more of like a knowledge expert, like a knowledge leader. So like for me, I have like a pretty in-depth expertise which is like so random, I guess, in packaging regulatory and food safety, where like I could move into a management role. I have the experience, but I also have this like deep technical expertise. And so like for the business, probably their preference is to keep me now on that T side. And at Mars, like Lisa alluded to, like there has to be an opening it's not like, I don't know, if you have friends in like finance, I feel like there's like a very clear, like every 2 years they get promoted into the next role. At Mars, at least, like there has been an opening for that role. And so honestly, sometimes folks get like stuck because there's no opening. And so they end up moving around. So like if you start as like I started as a senior scientist in our doing like method development, like I said, I had a manager that was like the next level up manager. My manager is still in that role 6 years later, 5 years later, like that role never opened. And so I made the decision. I said like, okay, I want to advance my career. There was an opening in scientific and regulatory affairs, and I was interested in it, and I got hired, so I kind of moved over. So there's like some moving around. It's not like super linear. And to me, that's great because it's like, okay, I've worked with the factories. I've worked, I worked in the factory. I understand how quality works. And I worked in regulatory. Now I work in food safety, but I'm like very closely partnered with regulatory, and I have that regulatory knowledge. So it's like, it's kind of nice that it's not necessarily always linear. Because some folks do just like want to stay in the same role forever, and that's fine. And I think if that's something that you want to do, you're like, I love managing, or like, I love working in the lab and like working on these projects. I'm happy. It's great. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. It's not like so straightforward all the time.
So, thank you. Any other questions from our audience today? Yes, one question that I had, when you had initially joined each of your teams, are you kind of allowed to pick projects, or are you kind of automatically assigned projects or certain portfolios? How does that look like for each of your organizations?
So I'm typically assigned projects. Like, we need someone to work on this. You're going to be the formulator to develop a bucket dilutable disinfectant for Southeast Asia. How I do it is up to me, but that's the goal. There's been very rarely has there been times where I've been able to decide which, like, or I want to go chase this down, but typically I've been in product development roles. So it's been, here's what we need to go do. Let's figure out how to do it. So it's been mostly, I've been given projects.
Yeah, when I first started at 3M, I was sort of like put on like a technology platform. Like I'm on the water-based adhesives platform, which is just 3 of us in this specific group. And it's kind of the way that like our group specifically works is that we're kind of like 3M's chemical company. And so our customers are 3M divisions that are making products. And so they come to us and say like, hey, we have this formulation. Can we scale it up? And or they just say, we have this idea. Can you make us a formulation? So it's kind of like all of that. And I kind of, like I said, with like our kind of, explore culture, we can kind of work on whatever we want. I'm not really specifically assigned anything necessarily. It's kind of projects come in from customer divisions, or we solicit customer divisions and say, we have this material, like, let's start a project. So my manager has never assigned me a project. It's kind of just as they roll in, there's 3 people in my little platform. We'll say like, okay, who wants to take point on this? Like, you got a bunch on your plate. All right, you'll take this one, and we all can work together. But so yeah, it kind of just happens. That's not a good answer, but it sort of just happens. Stuff comes in, and you kind of just deal with it. So, but I mean, some stuff you do get assigned. Some stuff it's like you need to do this, but it happens sort of organically sometimes.
So I'm onboarding still onto my current role. So I'll talk about my previous role. I supported our entire innovation packaging team. So basically, as they had new packaging materials, they'd say, hey, we're working on this compostable bag for M&Ms. It's being made by this converter. Converter is like the company that makes the, converts like the ink and the adhesive and the paper all together. They would bring that to me and they'd say like, I have this new project. Like, is it legal? Is it safe? And so then I would go, work with the converter and the engineer and, maybe the sustainability team on like going through all like the documentation and the test, like the lab testing, the compost testing, safety testing, etc. So I'm not like, I guess I'm not like necessarily like picking my projects, more like supporting a team, but part of the project team, because like when there were issues, so like, hey, we found this X, chemical X migrating into the food. It's a safety concern. So like I would work with them to go to the suppliers and say like, hey, where is this coming from? Can we, okay, it's in the adhesive. Okay, can we change out the adhesive? Can we work with the adhesive supplier to reduce it? Could be 3M, like, could come to you and say like, hey, this is too high. So, yeah, so it's never like, I want to work on this compostable pack. But fortunately, like I said, I've been doing mostly sustainability projects, which is what I'm super excited about. So I have had that opportunity.
Awesome. Good to hear about the variability between all your companies. Another question, I guess, also kind of following up on that. Is there any particular project or product that you worked on that you're really proud of?
So I will jump in about 6 years ago, I was on a project to do a restage of all our kitchen and bath formulas globally. And that project was very difficult. We had a technology we were supposed to use and we ended up not using. I think I alluded to that earlier in one of my answers, because I proved we could do it without this kind of expensive technology. And we had to roll it out globally. So I had to figure out, with the team, of course, but ultimately it fed into the formulation, what materials I could use in, I think we launched this thing in 40 different countries. It had germ kill claims, what we needed to do to make the germ kill claims in those 40 different countries, and how we were going to source raw materials. It was a lot of work. But we rolled it out the door and it's still out there now. So I think that is the achievement I am most proud of in my time at SC Johnson.
Have yet to actually launch a product. It's sometimes slow going, like we were talking about at the very beginning, business priorities change and things unfortunately get shelved, but we've got I'm here at the factory today to scale something up in the pilot plant that has been a project I've worked on for multiple years that kind of came out of some just lab experimenting. So I'm really proud to see that finally getting out there. And then we're similarly next week doing our first full-scale manufacturing lot of another adhesive that I've spent a few years working on. So keep an eye out for that. So it's nice to finally see stuff come to fruition and actually go be sold after, years of working on it and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So see.
That's awesome. So I stood up to get, I've talked about it, but the compostable M&M's bag, that's like, it's off the market because I think the M&M's expired. We're working on the next run, but there were so many issues with this product, like from a quality, like the bags are really brittle, right? We're working with new materials. There were some safety concerns, which we were able, to work with our converters and fix, because we would never put anything out that's safe, obviously. Like, I don't know, just like super excited. And like, I know a lot of people don't compost. I don't know how the U of I campus is, maybe the campus composts, like Mars composts in the office and my condo compost. I'm like super excited, but yeah, so these, and then this is just the paper Mars bar that's recyclable for Australia and New Zealand. So it's, yeah, really excited to be able to support these projects and like actually get things on the market that hopefully aren't going to go into the garbage. It's like when one less thing. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Now I really want M&Ms.
I literally always have M&Ms,
Chocolate
so
now.
it's a perk. Because even though I'm in Petcare, I still sit in a chocolate office. I mean, like a Mars Wrigley office. So I was in the office yesterday, and someone asked me to pick them up. We do have an M&M store in the office, so yes, more perks of working in CPG. Sure, Lisa has a very clean home.
I do. I get to bring home things to try out too.
Yeah.
I always have to make sure I label it correctly. I was working on a like a thickened cleaner. It was supposed to be for toilets, but it was in a trigger bottle. My husband thought it was glass cleaner and started like, yelled at me when I got home. This stuff doesn't work. Like, well, it's not for glass. What were you doing?
Yeah, we've had that. We ate something that was high fiber, but there was no
Mhm.
nutrition label on the back, which is why you need a nutrition label. And my husband and I both had like horrible stomach aches for like a week. And the engineer was like, "Oh yeah, those were like the really high fiber version." I was like, "Thank you for letting me know later." So, yeah, I've we definitely had our share of poorly labeled
Or
treats
labeled
in the
with the
house.
it was labeled with the project name, but obviously my
Yes.
husband doesn't know that that
No.
project was a like toilet sink cleaner, not a glass cleaner.
Yes. Sorry, it's
Awesome.
not in person. I could hand out candy.
These are fun little stories, and I'm sure we have probably come across your products in the market. Another question in the chat was, since y'all mentioned your current role was being different from graduate studies, when you started learning new areas of science or new technologies, procedures in the lab, were there formal trainings or were you mostly self-led in learning these new skills?
So in my case, so I went from, as I mentioned, straight to Kimberly-Clark from grad school. Grad school, I did a lot of NMR work, some synthesis, and then I landed in the tissue products division. So we were making Kleenex, Cottonelle, very different. The lab technicians became my best friends because they are the ones that understand how to run all the test procedures, how to do all the routine work. They taught me how to make something called hand sheets where you can check like how chemistry works without having to go clear to a tissue machine, how to do all the tests on the finished product. And that has also been the case when I moved to SC Johnson. The lab technicians know all the test methods. My role now making formulated products, there aren't really fancy lab techniques. A lot of it, quite honestly, is dump and stir because it has to be to manufacture it. We can't do anything typically crazy. Our plants aren't set up for it. So Chris?
A lot of mine was learning by doing, partly by myself, but from coworkers and stuff. And coming from grad school, I did like catalysis and methods and very much like organic chemistry, small molecule organic chemistry. And then I came to 3M and started doing emulsion polymerizations, and I'd never done it before. So it was a lot of learning like new chemistry, new techniques, and learning a lot of I'll say engineering, but not really engineering, but a lot of the like process and scale up, like how things work in the factory, like learning that from the engineers. 3M said I was able to go to a short course last summer. There's like a short course that specializes in like emulsion polymerization chemistry. So that was really great to kind of like dig into that a little more. So it was a lot of both getting the lab and making a mess and also learning from coworkers and people who are experts at the company too.
At Mars, like when I was working in the lab, I either got like support, from like lab techs from like other teams. So like we have an analytical chemistry team, or like other folks on my team. Or like if we didn't have expertise in that technique, we would like kind of work with like the instrument supplier. So like they would like come out and train us, or like I would go get trained on something. At the FDA, to be honest, it was like figure like there were like 3 of us. We got an like a benchtop XRD, which is like the size of a microwave. It was super cool. They came and trained us like once, but it was kind of like, okay. So I spent like a lot of time doing like, actually, honestly, that probably helped me for my next role, doing like method development, like figuring out like what's the best way to measure, to do XRD on these polymers. And like, I wrote up like, a standard operating procedure. So it is dependent, but that's also the government. So that's a little bit different, but it's a good learning experience. And there's always someone that knows how to do it. If they're not at your company, you might just need to like look externally. And now with like regulatory and food safety, and like, I didn't know anything about regulations for food contact materials. I know it's not analytical, but I had an amazing mentor who'd been doing it for 22 years. He just retired like a month ago. And like until the last day he was at Mars, we were like still asking him questions of like super specific incidents, because it was like, God had to get like everything out of his brain. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that. Other questions from the attendees who are here today?
Hi, my name is Noah, and I am a student in the Swedler group. And I have a question, sort of like a two-parter about, for those of you who worked in the lab and kind of then moved to more of like a desk type job, how did you, I think this was touched on a little bit, but how did you sort of decide to make that transition and kind of commit to leaving the lab at that point? And then also about work-life balance and how like, lab versus desk job, like do they both have 40-hour week typical, or are, for example, lab employees expected to stay longer or do more things outside of regular work hours?
So I'll jump in. So I never actually made the decision I am stepping away from lots of lab work. It just sort of happened as my role changed. I will say that between the pandemic and I had a health issue where I was restricted from the lab, that's kind of when things started. And I was working from home for a year, obviously not access to the lab then. And prior to that, I was under some medical restrictions, which have been lifted, thankfully. So I kind of fell out of the habit of going to the lab because I couldn't. And since then, I do try to, but I also have so many meetings. If you're on different projects and you've got to go talk to this person from 10 to 11, and you might have a half hour, that's just enough time to maybe find your chemicals. As far as work-life balance, I don't think there's a difference from the non-managerial side, lab versus non-lab. Managers tend to work a bit more hours. Because we're global, I do have evening or early morning calls, but you can also, if you know you have a call at 8 at night, leave a little early. As long as your work gets done, no one's clocking us in and out. I think that answered it. There was another piece, but I'm drawing a blank. So, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, it's probably very company dependent too, like what the culture is. Every company is different as to their expectations. I've never worked a weekend at 3M, so I'm really proud to say that. I couldn't say that in grad school. I mean, I've probably cracked my computer open every once in a while. I'm not saying I've never done any work at all on a weekend, but I've never had to come to lab. That was very clearly communicated from the beginning that was not the expectation, was that I not be, killing myself. And I'm really, really grateful for that, because that is a huge part of me, is work-life balance. So I think I know I said at the beginning to say yes to everything, but like you also have to set some limits for yourself on, your own life and your own happiness, and you need to be able to set boundaries. So yeah, I think typically 3M, managers do tend to probably work a little more in terms of hours. And certainly if you have programs that you're working on that are international, I've certainly had meetings in China, 10 o'clock at night or something like that. There's some of that. But I think, if you find yourself at a company that's really not allowing you to be healthy and happy, then you should probably reevaluate if that's right for you, because you know you only live once, and work is important. But we have a joking saying that we always say in my group, was like, it's just glue. Like it's there's more to life, so it's important to prioritize that too.
Yes, I forgot what I was going to add. Especially when my children were small, I knew I had a lot of international calls. I blocked my calendar and said I was unavailable between 5 and 7. 7 is when my kids went to bed. I could start taking calls after that, but for many years, my calendar was completely blacked out. And that also helped because people knew, okay, we have to wait after that time or else Lisa won't join the meeting.
I'm blocked. Yeah, I have a almost 2-year-old. And like I'm blocked every morning for 45 minutes, which like I do have meetings during a lot of time in the morning just because like they're big meetings, but no one would schedule one-on-one with me. And then every day, like for daycare pickup and bedtime. And yeah, so there's that. With working on the weekends and at nights, like it is not safe to work at night in a laboratory. It's not safe as a graduate student, but no one cares. Not like no one cares, it's just the culture. I hope that it's getting better. And there's not this in industry though, like you are not allowed, like it is not safe to be working in the evening by yourself, and so you cannot do it. I mean, you could be on checking your emails, but like you cannot be working in a laboratory. It is and like I worked in a food lab, like I was working with chocolate and like dog food, like stuff you have in your house. Like it doesn't matter. It's not safe. So I never, as a like lab chemist, worked in the evenings. Moving out of the lab, I was super ready to be out of the lab as soon as I was done with. Honestly, after graduate school, I was like, I don't want to work in the lab anymore. I've been doing lab work for 10 years. I'm bored. I want to like look into something else. I did my postdoc, which was like pretty academic. And then when I was looking for jobs after that, I was like, I'm gonna look for jobs that are either out of a lab or at a big company where I can get my foot in the door. And then like once I'm in the door, find a position where I'm out of the laboratory. So like coming to Mars, I was in a lab role doing method development. It was very different than what I was doing. So I did enjoy it. Also, just some background is that my team was mostly based in France and there were a couple of us in Chicago. And so I had a lot of projects that were based on equipment that I did not have in Chicago. They only had them like in the French lab, or like some of our other like factory labs where like it wasn't feasible for me to travel like all the time. So other folks would kind of like do the lab testing for me, and then I would like get to do all the like analytical, like characterize the data, like analyze the results, prepare it, present it. So you kind of using like the lab techs to my advantage and doing more like project management. So I, even in my lab role, I sort of like took a like pathway towards like being in the laboratory less. And then once COVID hit, it was like, okay, I'm out of the lab completely. And like we figured out kind of ways to get around things. I think I went in like twice. So yeah, for me, it was like a very conscious, like I was very happy with that decision, but I'm still very technical and I still use my science skills in my role. Like I did migration testing which is like safety packaging testing during my postdoc. Like I was doing the testing and now I review the test reports. So I still have like that analytical, like science part of my job. I'm not like just sitting at a computer. So, I mean, I am sitting at a computer, but I'm not just like, I'm still using the science part of my brain. So I think that answers all the questions.
And I think too, like just to like kind of another thing that I was thinking about in terms of like working hours and work-life balance is like a skill that I think is really important to going into like your first job is work smarter, not harder. Like get it done. If it's done by the end of the day, there's always more you can do, but that doesn't mean you need to be staying in lab until 2 in the morning or whatever. You know, I know that in grad school that's not always realistic, but it's less about the hours, and it's really, if you're getting your job done and you're moving the needle forward, go home. Go to the weekend.
That was one of the sources of culture shock, starting in industry. All of a sudden I had all this free time. The organic department was notorious back when I was in grad school, that you were there till 10 p.m. at least, weeknights, and definitely on Saturdays. And all of a sudden I go home from work and I don't have to go back anywhere. What do I do with all this time? Spent about 2 months watching nothing but bad TV, and then developed some hobbies.
Awesome, great. I'm sure that's reassuring for our students and attendees here. Another question that came through the chat was, what kinds of things should new grads be asking in interviews that they're maybe not? Any advice about that?
Don't ask things you can Google.
Yes.
Like, don't ask, where's the office located? Like, don't ask questions like that. I like asking about like kinds of projects, like, can you give me an example of some projects? Mars interviews in a very like they use like the STAR, like the situation, task, action, results. Like, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker. So like, you don't get to like in depth of like your, you have their stories. I don't know. So I think it's good to ask questions that can almost like open more of a conversation. So I think when I started, it mentioned nanoparticles in the job description. So I was like, hey, I saw it mentions nanoparticles in the job description. Like, that's like, what my background's in. Like, do you have any examples of projects? And then we like got on a side conversation on like titanium dioxide. So it kind of like helps loosen up and like have more of a conversation instead of a like, do you like working here?
Yeah. Ask something specific, or what's your favorite, what's been your favorite project? Someone asked me that. Something I think everyone knows to ask, what does your day-to-day look like? But something a little more specific, I think, is can open a conversation.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask like some of the more like, I don't know, I feel like hopefully the mentality in that is changing, but like it's okay to ask about things like compensation and vacation time, and like, there's a tactful way to do it, but that's a reasonable question to say, like, what is the compensation for this job? Like, what are my vacation hours? Like some of those more nitty-gritty things, like, do it tactfully, obviously, but it's not unreasonable to ask some of those questions too in an interview, because that's an important part of picking a job.
I agree with you, Chris, but I've had a couple, because Mars, you interview internally for everything. A lot of times, like, there's only time for like a couple of questions, and I think those could be asked as follow-ups in an email. So I think those are important questions to ask, but I would be thoughtful if like you only have time for like 1 or 2 questions to not use those, because you could always like shoot an email to HR or like ask after you get an offer.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why. Even like travel, like when I interviewed for this role, I asked a lot about travel, because I have a kid. I'm actually pregnant with my second, so like I'm not traveling. Like, I mean, I am traveling for my job, but like I'm not going 25%, a week, a month. Like, I'm not doing that. But I kind of knew that would, if I went in and I was like, yeah, I'm pregnant and I'm not doing all that travel, like, so I kind of waited until after I had my offer, and then it was like, hey, I want to talk about travel kind of as like part of my negotiation, and it was fine. So.
So thanks for those insights. And if you need help with preparing for interviews or thinking about questions to ask, our office can always help you. We do mock interviews, so you can come by and see us and we'll help you with that. Just wanted to give that shameless plug. We only have a few more minutes for our panel today. Any last minute questions before we move on? Yes, my final question for all our panelists would be, what final words of advice, words of wisdom, advice, or thoughts do you have for our attendees?
I'd say be open to whatever job experience that comes your way. Since I was in the organic department, I assumed I was on the organic to pharmaceutical company pipeline, and I clearly was not. I ended up at a Kimberly-Clark making tissue products. I then did a year doing skin science, completely out of my wheelhouse, but fascinating and helped open up other possibilities. I then went to formulated products and got to do a lot of stuff with how products interact with skin. Came to SC Johnson and the same. Taken the interesting opportunities that came my way, even if they don't look like they were a good fit on paper, because you learn something every stop along the way.
Yeah, stay flexible in terms of, things that you may not think you're interested in, you might be interested in. Stand up for yourself. So you're allowed to do that in life and in your job. Be your own advocate. And just remember that grad school is a snapshot in time and life does go on. So there is a future, and if it's getting hard, it will get better.
Life is so much better after graduate school.
Very true.
Yeah. I still have dreams. Yeah.
Mine have mostly.
Yeah, okay, so eventually they will go away. That's good to
They
know.
do. They mostly have gone. Although having done this, maybe I will have a nightmare about my oral exam again.
I know I mentioned this already, but just really use your networks. Like, use the Career Center. They have the networks, talk to, older graduate students, even if you didn't have like such strong relationships with them, like if you have someone that you cross paths with, like send them a LinkedIn message and say like, hey, I'm a grad. I have people from my PhD lab reach out who I've never met who are like, hey, I'm in, the same group. I'm interested in CPG. Would you mind talking? And like, I'm always happy to help, or like, have a 30-minute conversation. So reach out to your networks and just, be open about opportunities, because I never would have guessed that I'd be doing like food safety for Petcare, like if you asked me, when I finished my PhD. So.
So with that, thank you for all your amazing insights. You all emphasized on the importance of network, which is kind of why we host these events for our students, is for our students and postdocs to learn all about the breadth of opportunities that are available for them, as long as they're open, as long as they're flexible. And then, as you also mentioned, the importance of work-life balance and advocating for yourself, and again, being flexible in whatever comes your way. So really appreciate all those thoughtful advice. Students, if you have any questions, would you be okay if they reached out to you all through LinkedIn? Awesome. So yeah, again, use your network and reach out if you have questions. So today's the last session of our Graduate Careers Exploration Week. I want to thank you all for being here today and for being at the panels throughout the week. The recording for the session will be posted next week on the YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. Again, thank you all so much for all your questions, all your thoughtful advice, and thank you for your time for being here. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.